The picture that changed everything. Brienne had always believed in the power of memories. Every Sunday, she made it a ritual to take a family picture and post it on Instagram, a tradition that showcased the love between her, her husband Noah, and their two children, Emily and Caleb. Their followers adored the wholesome snapshots, often commenting on how picture-perfect their family seemed. This Sunday was no different. As the golden hues of the setting sun painted their suburban home, Brienne set up her phone, ensuring the perfect angle before calling her family to gather. Noah wrapped his arm around her shoulders while Emily and Caleb beamed at the camera. Click. The photo was taken. Smiling, Brienne quickly scanned the image before posting it with her usual caption. Another beautiful Sunday with my favorite people. #FamilyFirst #Sunday Memories. Within minutes, the engagement started pouring in, likes, comments, and shares flooded her notifications. But something was different. Instead of the usual compliments and heart emojis, the comments were filled with strange questions and concerned messages. Did anyone else notice that? Look at the reflection. Call the police now. Brienne frowned, confused. Reflection? She quickly clicked on her post, staring at the image. It looked normal at first glance, her family, their front porch, and the soft glow of the evening sun. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. In the window behind them, a shadowy figure was visible. Her heart pounded. The figure was faint but unmistakable, a tall, dark silhouette standing just inside their home, almost blending into the background. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The figure's eyes seemed to be staring directly at the camera. Brienne gasped, dropping her phone onto the kitchen counter. The house had been empty when they took the picture, she was sure of it. Emily and Caleb had been outside playing, and Noah had been beside her the whole time. So who, or what, was inside their house? She felt a chill crawl up her spine. Swallowing hard, she reached for her phone again, her fingers trembling as she zoomed in on the photo. The more she looked at it, the more unsettling it became. The figure wasn't just standing there. It was watching them. Her mind raced. Could it be a trick of the light? A weird reflection? Maybe something outside casting a shadow? But deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. A loud bang suddenly echoed through the house, making her jump. She spun around, her breath hitching in her throat. Noah, she called out, trying to steady her voice. No answer. The kids were outside playing, she could still hear their laughter faintly through the window. But Noah had gone to the garage just minutes ago. Another bang. Brienne's hands shook as she grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Slowly, she stepped toward the hallway, her ears straining for any sound. The living room was dim, the fading sunlight casting eerie shadows across the floor. She peeked around the corner, expecting, hoping, to see Noah coming inside. But the room was empty. Then, from upstairs, the sound of a door creaking open. Brienne's breath caught in her throat. Someone was inside the house. She turned back toward the front door, ready to call for Noah when her phone vibrated violently in her hand. She glanced down. A private message. From a username she didn't recognize. Get out of the house. Now. Brienne's blood ran cold. She didn't stop to think. She didn't even hesitate. She sprinted toward the front door, her pulse pounding in her ears. As she flung it open, she nearly collided with Noah, who was just coming up the steps. Bree? What's wrong? He asked, concern etched on his face. She could barely get the words out. There's someone in the house. Noah's expression darkened. Without another word, he pushed past her and stepped inside, his body tense. Stay with the kids, he said firmly, disappearing into the house. Brienne stood frozen on the porch, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The kids ran up to her, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Caleb asked, his big brown eyes full of worry. Brienne forced a smile, kneeling to hug them. "Everything's okay, sweetheart." But as she held them close, her eyes drifted back to the photo on her phone. And that's when she noticed something even more terrifying. The figure in the window. It had moved. A stranger in the house. Brienne's hands trembled as she stared at the picture on her phone. Her heart pounded in her chest, the fear thickening in her throat. The shadowy figure that had been in the window just moments ago was gone. She turned back to the house. Noah had gone inside, searching for whoever, or whatever, was there. A sickening feeling twisted in her gut. Had she just sent her husband straight into danger? Her grip on her phone tightened. "Think, Brienne, think." The kids were watching her closely, sensing her fear even if they didn't understand it. She couldn't let them see how terrified she was. Taking a deep breath, she crouched down to their level. "Listen to me, okay? I want you both to go to Mrs. Patterson's house across the street and wait for me there. Don't come back until I say so." Emily, the older of the two, frowned. "Mom, why? What's wrong?" Brienne hesitated. She couldn't tell them the truth. They were too young. "I just need to check something with Daddy, that's all. But I need to know you're safe. So please, go to Mrs. Patterson's." Emily exchanged a glance with Caleb, then nodded hesitantly. She grabbed her brother's hand, and the two of them ran across the street, knocking on their neighbor's door. Brienne exhaled sharply. At least the kids were safe. Now, she had to get Noah. Steeling herself, she stepped cautiously into the house, closing the door behind her. The silence was deafening. The air inside felt off. Heavy. "Noah," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. She crept further in, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the walls, making the house feel unfamiliar, like a place she no longer belonged. The living room was empty. So was the kitchen. Then she heard it. A soft thump from upstairs. Her breath hitched. She reached for the nearest object, a fireplace poker, and clutched it tightly as she moved toward the staircase. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she ascended the steps, her grip on the poker so tight her knuckles turned white. The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched before her, dimly lit by the last traces of daylight filtering through the windows. Another thump. It was coming from the master bedroom. Brienne swallowed hard and inched toward the door, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run. But she had to find Noah. The door was slightly ajar. She raised the poker, nudging the door open with her foot. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was a mess. The blankets were ripped from the bed, the nightstand lamp lay shattered on the floor, and the closet door was wide open. But Noah was nowhere in sight. Brienne took a shaky step inside. Noah? Silence. Then, behind her. Creak. The sound of the floorboards shifting. She spun around, raising the poker. But the hallway was empty. A cold sweat dripped down her back. She could have sworn she heard someone right behind her. Then, from inside the closet. A whisper. Soft. Almost imperceptible. But she heard it. "Help me." Brienne's body went rigid. That wasn't Noah's voice. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of that house now. But something stronger, some deep, primal sense, forced her feet forward. She stepped toward the closet, her heart pounding so loudly it nearly drowned out her own breathing. With trembling fingers, she reached for the door and yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes. Boxes. Old shoes. Noah wasn't there. But then. She saw it. Her breath caught in her throat. Etched into the inside wall of the closet were deep, ragged scratches. As if someone had been trapped inside, clawing desperately to get out. Her pulse roared in her ears. Then, the whispers came again. "Help me." But this time, they were right behind her. Brienne whirled around, her heart slamming against her ribs. But the room was empty. She was alone. A sharp crash from downstairs made her jump. That was enough. She turned and ran, bolting down the stairs 2 at a time. The moment her feet hit the living room floor, she skidded to a stop. The front door was wide open. And standing just outside, in the dim light of dusk, were 2 police officers. Brienne's breath came in ragged gasps. "Oh, thank God. Please, my husband, he's missing, and I think someone's inside." "Ma'am," one of the officers interrupted, his face grim. Brienne's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The second officer spoke. "We need you to step outside." "What?" "No, I need to find my husband." "Ma'am," the first officer repeated, his voice firm. "Step outside. Now." Brienne hesitated. The officer's tone wasn't concerned. It was authoritative. Commanding. A terrible feeling spread through her chest. Slowly, she stepped onto the porch. That's when she saw the police car parked on the curb. And Noah. Handcuffed. Her entire world tilted. "Noah," she whispered, her throat tight. What's happening?" Noah didn't look at her. His face was pale, his hands restrained behind his back. The officer turned to her, his gaze unreadable. "Your husband is under arrest, Mrs. Carter." Brienne's knees nearly buckled. "For what?" The officer glanced at his partner before answering. "For the murder of a woman named Allison Hayes. A woman who went missing 10 years ago, in this very house." Brienne's blood turned to ice. She could barely process the words. "That's impossible. That doesn't make any sense." The officer's expression didn't change. "It makes perfect sense," he said, holding up his phone. "Because the woman who went missing? The woman whose body was never found?" He turned the phone toward Brienne. It was a picture. A picture of their family. The one she had posted just hours ago. And there, standing in the reflection of the window, clear as day, was a woman. Her face pale. Her eyes hollow. Staring. Right at Noah, the secret buried in shadows. Brienne's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The world around her seemed to spin as she stared at the phone screen, her vision tunneling in on the image. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a woman. A woman with hollow, lifeless eyes and a pale face that seemed almost translucent. Brienne's knees buckled, and she clutched the wooden porch railing to keep from collapsing. This has to be some kind of mistake," she whispered, shaking her head violently. The officer didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked between the screen and her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice measured, "do you know this woman?" Brienne's mind was reeling. Every part of her wanted to say no. She needed it to be no. But something about that face. It stirred something deep inside her. A memory she couldn't quite grasp. She tore her eyes away from the image and turned to Noah. "Noah, what is this? What are they talking about?" Noah's mouth opened, but no words came. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his handcuffs, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked truly defeated. "I don't know," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I swear, Brienne. I don't know." The second officer, a taller man with dark, piercing eyes, finally spoke. "Mr. Carter, we received an anonymous tip about your family photo earlier today. The caller said we needed to take a closer look at your house. That's when we found this in our records." He pulled out his own phone and tapped the screen, flipping it around so Brienne could see. It was an old police report. The name at the top made her stomach lurch. Allison Hayes, missing persons case. The photo attached was nearly identical to the woman in the window. Brienne shook her head, her fingers clutching the edge of her sweater like a lifeline. But that can't be. This woman, she's in our house. In our family photo. And that's exactly why we need to take your husband in for questioning, the officer said. Noah wouldn't hurt anyone, Brienne snapped, anger flaring up to replace the fear. This is ridiculous. The officer remained stone-faced. Ma'am, the last place Allison Hayes was seen alive was in this house. The very house you and your family moved into 3 years ago. Brienne felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. 3 years ago. They had bought this house from an elderly couple who claimed they were downsizing. They never mentioned anything about a missing woman. But then, why did the name Allison Hayes sound so familiar? Brienne turned to Noah, searching his face for answers. Noah, please, she begged. Tell me you don't know anything about this. Noah exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair despite his wrists being restrained. Bree, I swear, I don't. But before he could finish, another voice cut through the night. A woman's voice. Brienne. Brienne's blood ran cold. The officers heard it too. They both turned sharply, their hands drifting toward their weapons. The voice had come from inside the house. But the house was supposed to be empty. The children were across the street. And Noah was standing right in front of them. Brienne's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But something about the voice, its familiarity, its urgency, kept her rooted in place. She turned her gaze to the open doorway of her home. The hallway stretched into darkness, silent, still. The officers exchanged glances. We're going in, the taller one said, drawing his flashlight and stepping forward. Brienne hesitated, then followed. Every step felt like walking into a nightmare. As they moved deeper inside, the air seemed to grow heavier, the silence more oppressive. Then, the lights flickered. Brienne gasped, clutching the officer's sleeve in panic. The bulbs above them sputtered violently before cutting out completely, plunging them into near-total darkness. The officer cursed under his breath, flicking on his flashlight. A beam of white cut through the blackness, illuminating the hallway. And that's when Brienne saw it. The closet door. The same closet where she had seen those scratches earlier. It was now wide open. And inside, a figure stood. A woman. The same woman from the photograph. Brienne's breath stopped. The officers reacted instantly, their flashlights locking onto the figure. Ma'am, show us your hands, one of them shouted. But the woman didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Brienne's heart slammed against her ribs. Something wasn't right. Then, the woman's lips moved. Brienne barely heard the words. He's lying. Brienne's mouth went dry. What? The woman's hollow eyes locked onto hers. He's lying, Brienne. He knows. The officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we need you to. And then, the woman vanished. Not stepped away. Not ran. Just disappeared. The officers cursed, sweeping their flashlights wildly. Where did she go? Brienne could barely think. Her legs trembled, her body frozen in shock. She turned, running back toward the front door. Only to find Noah staring at her. But there was something in his expression that made her stomach churn. A darkness in his eyes. A secret. One she had never noticed before. "Noah," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "What did you do?" Noah said nothing. The officers grabbed him, pulling him away toward the squad car. And for the first time since this nightmare started, Noah didn't resist. He just kept staring at Brienne. Silent. Unmoving. As if he already knew what was coming next. Brienne's whole body shook as the squad car doors slammed shut. The house behind her loomed in eerie silence. And deep in the back of her mind, a single, terrifying thought took root. What if the woman was right? What if Noah was lying? What if the man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been hiding a dark, terrible secret all along? Buried truths and shattered illusions. Brienne stood frozen on the porch, her mind unraveling with the weight of what had just happened. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in her wide, unblinking eyes as the officers drove away with Noah. The sound of the siren faded into the distance, but the suffocating silence it left behind was even more unbearable. Her body trembled. Not from the cold, but from something far worse, fear. She turned her gaze back to the house. Their home. But for the first time, it no longer felt safe. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she forced herself to move. She had to get inside. She had to understand what was happening. She stepped cautiously through the threshold, her hands trembling as she flicked on the hallway light. The bulb buzzed and flickered before glowing dimly. Her eyes darted toward the closet door. It was still open. Her breath hitched as she inched closer, her heart slamming against her ribcage. That woman had been here. Had spoken to her. Had warned her. And then, she had disappeared. Brienne reached out with a shaking hand, gripping the closet door. It felt ice-cold under her fingertips. She hesitated, then yanked it fully open. Empty. No sign of the woman. No shadow, no eerie presence. Nothing. Brienne exhaled sharply, her head spinning. Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe stress and fear were distorting her reality. But then, something caught her eye. She crouched down, her fingers tracing over the wooden floor of the closet. Scratches. Thin, jagged scratches marred the wood, barely visible unless you were looking for them. And suddenly, Brienne's mind flashed back to earlier that day, when she had first noticed those marks. They weren't random. They were letters. Brienne's fingers trembled as she traced them again, this time paying closer attention. The letters formed a name. Allison. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman. The one from the photo. The one from the missing persons report. This wasn't a coincidence. Something had happened to her in this house. And Noah. Brienne squeezed her eyes shut. What if the officers were right? What if Noah had been lying to her? The very thought made her stomach turn. No. It couldn't be. He wasn't capable of something like this. He wasn't. But deep inside, a part of her wasn't so sure anymore. She took a deep, steadying breath and pulled out her phone. If there were answers, she needed to find them. She searched the name Allison Hayes. Dozens of articles popped up. Missing woman, 24-year-old Allison Hayes last seen 3 years ago. Family desperate for answers as case grows cold. Strange disappearance, police suspect foul play. Brienne scrolled through the images. And then, her blood ran cold. There was a picture. A group photo. And standing in the corner of that picture was Noah. Brienne nearly dropped the phone. She scrambled to click on the article, her hands clammy as she read the caption. Pictured above, Allison Hayes and her co-workers at Carter & Sullivan Architects, just weeks before her disappearance. Brienne's breath came in sharp gasps. Carter & Sullivan. Noah's old firm. The same firm he had abruptly left 3 years ago. He had known Allison. And he never told her. Brienne clutched her stomach, bile rising in her throat. Why? Why had he kept this from her? Why had he lied? The sound of a floorboard creaking made her jolt. She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat. The house was silent again. But she felt it. A presence. She wasn't alone. Brienne's fingers curled around her phone as she stepped backward, her pulse hammering. And then. A whisper. Soft. Faint. Right behind her. Find me. Brienne spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. No one was there. But something else was. The closet door. It had closed on its own. Brienne's skin prickled with terror. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle again. She had to know. She had to find her. With a deep breath, she yanked it open. And gasped. The floorboard inside the closet was slightly lifted. As if someone had tried to pry it open. Her mind raced. What if something was hidden there? What if? Brienne dropped to her knees, her fingers digging under the edge of the wood. She pulled. The board gave way with a sharp creak. Her heart pounded as she peered inside. And there, buried beneath the floor, was a small, rusted tin box. Brienne's breath hitched. Her fingers hesitated before pulling it out. She wiped the dust away and slowly pried it open. Inside. A folded letter. A locket. And a photograph. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter, her eyes darting over the words. As she read, her blood turned to ice. Her vision blurred. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. The letter was written in shaky, desperate handwriting. And at the very bottom, a signature. Allison Hayes. Brienne's heart stopped. She wasn't imagining things. Allison had been here. And she had left behind a message. Brienne's fingers tightened around the letter, her body trembling. Her eyes flicked toward the locket. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a tiny photo. A photo of Allison. And standing right beside her. Noah. Brienne's stomach twisted violently. This wasn't just a missing persons case. This was personal. Tears burned in her eyes. She had been living in a house filled with lies. She had been sleeping beside a man filled with secrets. And now, she was terrified of what she might uncover next. Brienne clutched the letter to her chest, her breath shaky. She had to know the truth. Even if it destroyed everything. Unraveling the web of lies. Brienne sat on the cold hardwood floor, her hands trembling as she reread the letter. The words, scrawled in desperate, jagged handwriting, burned into her mind. If someone finds this, please, don't let him get away with it. He's not who he says he is. He smiles, but it's a mask. He loves, but it's control. I trusted him. And now, I don't think I'll make it out. Please, if you're reading this, help me. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. Allison Hayes had been here. In this very house. She had hidden this letter, leaving behind a plea for help, one that had gone unanswered for 3 long years. And Noah. Noah had known her. Noah had been with her. Brienne's entire body trembled as she clenched the paper. She had spent years building a life with this man, believing in him, loving him, sharing a home, a bed, a future. And now, all of it felt like a carefully constructed lie. Her heart pounded so loudly that she barely heard the sound of her own breath. She looked back into the hole under the floorboard. The rusted tin box sat in her lap, but something told her there was more. With shaking hands, she reached back inside, feeling around the dusty, hidden compartment. Her fingers brushed against something rough. Another envelope. Brienne swallowed hard and pulled it out. Unlike the first letter, this one wasn't written in a desperate scrawl. It was deliberate, careful. And it wasn't signed by Allison. It was addressed to her. Brienne. If you're reading this, then everything I feared has already happened. I knew one day someone would find the truth. I just never thought it would be you. Her breath hitched. No. This couldn't be. I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. You were never supposed to know about Allison. But if you're reading this, then the past has finally caught up with me. Brienne's fingers went numb. The letter was written in Noah's handwriting. Her stomach twisted violently. This was a confession. Tears welled in her eyes as she forced herself to keep reading. I loved her once. But she found out something she shouldn't have. Something I tried to keep buried. I never wanted it to end the way it did. But I had no choice. Brienne felt like she was drowning. Every word felt like a knife plunging deeper into her chest. I tried to move on. I built a life with you, hoping the past would stay buried. But I should have known the truth never stays hidden forever. Now, you have a choice. You can let this go, pretend you never found this letter, or you can do what I know you will. Either way, by the time you read this, it will already be too late. The letter ended abruptly. Brienne's entire body felt paralyzed. The air in the room seemed to thin, and suddenly, she couldn't breathe. Noah had known Allison. And he had done something to her. Something unspeakable. Brienne's grip on the letter tightened until her knuckles turned white. She needed to get out of this house. Now. She pushed herself up, heart slamming against her ribs. Her mind raced. What was she supposed to do? Go to the police? Show them the letter? Would it even matter? Because Noah had already been arrested. And if what he wrote was true, then he knew she would find this. Brienne's stomach clenched with fear. If Noah was capable of whatever happened to Allison, then what would he do when he got out? A sudden noise shattered the silence. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Brienne's breath hitched as she whipped around. It was coming from the hallway. The floor creaked softly. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone. Slowly, she turned her head toward the front door, her heart pounding. It was locked. The windows were closed. But the footsteps continued. Coming closer. Brienne's mind screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't move. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the idea that Noah had already gotten out. Or that someone else was in the house. Her fingers tightened around the tin box as she backed toward the kitchen. She needed something, anything, to protect herself. A knife. A weapon. Something. The footsteps grew louder. Brienne's entire body went rigid. And then, the doorbell rang. The sound sent a jolt through her body. A different kind of fear gripped her now. Who would be here at this hour? Brienne's breathing came in sharp, uneven gasps. She hesitated, then forced her feet to move. She crept toward the door, her hands trembling as she reached for the peephole. She took a deep breath and looked through. A figure stood on the porch. Tall. Unmoving. The streetlight cast a shadow over their face. Brienne's pulse raced. It wasn't the police. And it wasn't Noah. Her hands shook as she reached for the doorknob. Every instinct told her not to open it. But something stronger, some deep, gnawing need for answers, forced her forward. She unlocked the door. And slowly, cautiously, she opened it. A woman stood there. Brienne's breath caught in her throat. She recognized her. She had seen her face before. But that was impossible. Because the woman standing on her porch was Allison Hayes. Alive, the truth that couldn't stay buried. Brienne's breath hitched in her throat. Her fingers trembled against the doorknob as she stared at the woman standing before her. Allison Hayes. The same Allison Hayes whose missing person reports she had read online. The same Allison Hayes whose desperate letter she had found hidden beneath the floorboards of her home. The same Allison Hayes who was supposed to be dead. Yet, she was here. Alive. Brienne opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Allison's eyes were dark, haunted. She looked exhausted, her skin pale beneath the flickering porch light. She was thinner than the photos Brienne had seen, cheeks slightly hollowed, hair tangled and unkempt, her hands fidgeting as if she wasn't used to standing still. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then, Allison took a shaky breath. "Can I come in?" Brienne's instincts screamed at her to say no. Every horror movie she had ever watched told her that inviting a ghost, real or metaphorical, into her home was a bad idea. But this wasn't a ghost. This was a woman who had been missing for 3 years. A woman Brienne's husband had tried to erase. Her heart pounded as she stepped aside. "Come in." Allison hesitated, her gaze darting around as if checking for something, someone, before stepping inside. Brienne shut the door behind her and turned to face her unexpected guest. She didn't know where to start. How to even begin to unravel the millions of questions racing through her mind. But Allison beat her to it. "You found the letter." Brienne swallowed hard. "Yes." Allison exhaled, a mix of relief and something else, something like fear. "Then you know about Noah." Brienne's grip tightened at her sides. "I know he lied to me." Her voice came out hoarse. "I know he knew you. I know, something happened." Allison scoffed bitterly. "Something happened." She shook her head, her lips curling into something that was half a laugh, half a sob. "That's one way to put it." Brienne clenched her jaw. "Tell me everything." Allison hesitated again, then nodded, moving toward the couch. She sank into the cushions, staring down at her hands. For the first time, Brienne noticed the scars. Thin, faint lines running across her wrists. Some old, some newer. Her stomach twisted. Allison inhaled sharply before she spoke. "I met Noah 5 years ago. He was charming, kind. Too good to be true. And, of course, that's because he was." Brienne felt her breath catch. "At first, it was small things," Allison continued, voice distant. "Little lies. Inconsistencies. Things that didn't add up. But I ignored them. Because I loved him. And because I didn't know what he was capable of." Brienne's fingers curled into fists. She knew that feeling all too well now. "Then, one night, I found something I wasn't supposed to." Allison's hands trembled. A folder. Hidden in his desk. It had photos, documents. Names I didn't recognize. People I had never met. She looked up at Brienne then, her eyes filled with something raw. People who had disappeared. Brienne's stomach dropped. "You think he?" Allison nodded slowly. "I don't just think. I know." Brienne felt sick. Allison's voice was shaking now. "I confronted him. And that was my mistake." The room felt suddenly colder. "I thought I knew him. I thought, even if he was lying, even if he was keeping secrets, he wouldn't hurt me." She swallowed hard. "But I was wrong." Brienne's entire body tensed. "What did he do?" Allison's gaze flickered away. He didn't kill me. If that's what you're wondering. No, that would have been too easy. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. He made me disappear. Brienne stared at her, heart hammering. What? Allison exhaled sharply. He drugged me. Took me somewhere. I don't remember much of those first few days. When I woke up, I was locked in a room. A basement, I think. I don't know how long I was there. Her voice grew distant again. Days. Weeks. It all blurred together. Brienne felt bile rise in her throat. Her husband, had done this? To Allison? How many others? Her thoughts raced. Then one night, there was a fire. Allison's lips parted slightly, as if she was remembering something she had tried to forget. I don't know how it started. Maybe fate, maybe something else. But I took my chance. I escaped. And I ran. Brienne couldn't breathe. Why didn't you go to the police? She whispered. Allison let out a bitter breath. I tried. But he was one step ahead of me. He had already made sure that, on paper, I was gone. No identity. No bank records. Nothing. If I came forward, I would have been treated like a fraud, or worse, like I was crazy. Brienne felt lightheaded. Everything she had built with Noah, everything she had believed about him, was crumbling like a sandcastle caught in a storm. So you've been hiding, Brienne murmured. Allison nodded. Until I saw your photo. Brienne's breath caught. You. I recognized the house. And I knew. Allison's gaze locked onto hers. I knew you had no idea who you were married to. Silence stretched between them. Brienne felt the weight of it pressing down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She thought back to the letter Noah had left behind. You can let this go, pretend you never found this letter, or you can do what I know you will. Either way, by the time you read this, it will already be too late. Too late for what? Brienne's pulse spiked with panic. Noah's in jail, she said quickly. The police took him in after they saw the photo. He can't. A knock at the door made her jump. Her heart nearly stopped. Allison's expression darkened. Brienne's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, checking the security camera. A police officer stood outside. Her breath caught. Relief flooded her. It's okay, she whispered. It's just the police. Maybe they have more information. Allison didn't move. Brienne stepped toward the door, unlocking it. The officer gave her a tight smile. Mrs. Carter? Brienne nodded. His smile faded. I'm going to need you to come with me. Her stomach twisted. Why? What's wrong? The officer hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said the words that shattered her world for good. Noah escaped. Brienne's blood ran cold. Allison stiffened beside her. And in that moment, she realized. The nightmare was only just beginning.